get take a couple minutes. Our next candidate is Jim Purcell. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
Who is Commissioner of Louisiana Board of Regents. He coordinates not only the 14 universities and 2 health science centers, but also 16 community and technical colleges. Jim has also served as the head of the Arkansas system of colleges and universities. Prior to that, he led strategic planning efforts for the Oklahoma Board of Regents. We received letters of support for him from the current university system heads in Arkansas and Iowa. We want to give you, Jim, 5 to 7 minutes to offer opening remarks and specifically talk about why are you interested in exploring this opportunity. Jim?
I think the most important thing is that Florida is a name brand for higher education. All of us have looked across the border at what you all been doing for the last 20, 30 years, actually. Your recreation, about a decade ago, I think has really done some great things here. The seamless transfer of students from the community college system is something that other states have done. We've implemented it both in Arkansas and in Louisiana, using your efforts as a model. Common course numbering, of course, is something that's big, and I just want to be really a part of even making y'all even more successful than you already are. My background started in 1982, been in higher ed for 30 years, planning and research officer. Started my background basically in student affairs, matching roommates by personality type, and that got kind of famous for about your 5 minutes of fame. And because of that was offered some opportunities to do additional research at some other places, and from there led to institutional research and planning. I've done everything from 2-year, 4-year, public-private universities, and helping them become really what they want to be. It's all about building a plan, and then it's about making sure that the plan is fully implemented. Keep an eye on what's mission critical, and work the plan, make sure that everything that you have in mind is going to happen by concentrating on your goals.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the Vice Chair, Chair Coons. Governor Coons.
Thank you, Governor Saney. Good morning, Dr. Purcell. Thanks for being here. And speaking for myself anyway, seeing Alabama and Georgia references in your resume, we still won't hold that against you.
Yes.
Even though both their teams are better than ours right now. I want to talk maybe 2 different roads. I'll start with performance-based funding just because it's something I'm particularly involved with. If you could talk to me about what, if anything, you have done in Louisiana with performance-based funding, what conversations may have occurred, and how you personally feel about performance-based funding, and what metrics you feel might be appropriate in measuring universities when it comes to what their funding would be.
Right. I've done performance-based funding in 3 systems. Oklahoma, I was over the Brain Gain 2010 initiative, which basically rewarded institutions for degree production, retention, graduation rates, and increases in degrees. It also had a component where it was based on the mission, so that you could actually have measures that were individualized for the institutions. They would help identify those. We would work on a contract. And that was basically showing their improvement over time. At that end of that particular program, the ranking for Oklahoma went from 46th to 42nd in the number of adults with a bachelor. So it was a very highly focused initiative that really moved people forward. A lot of those kind of activities is sort of why I got noticed to come to Arkansas. Arkansas needed those kind of things. They brought me in, I interviewed, became their, basically, Chancellor. We incorporated the end of course metric, where we only gave institutions reward for students that actually completed courses. That was the first time that happened, and that actually very immediately changed what was happening on the campus, as we ended up from 86% of the students finishing courses in a semester to 91%. And that, of course, that increases their ability to get out sooner, increases degree completion rates. Also, why in Arkansas we actually provided a statewide scholarship similar to your Bright Star Scholarship.
Bright Futures.
Bright Futures. And that was the first time that we were able to do that. That particular initiative, because it was based on lottery funds, we had 1 year where we had about a half a year of lottery revenue, and what we actually did is use that 1 year extra money to get students completed, basically get adults who are out of school, who are within 30 hours, and seniors who are closest to degree, additional tuition revenue or paid for their tuition so they can complete. And if you actually look at Arkansas's data today, you'll see a big spike for that amount of effort that we did there. Going to Louisiana, we've incorporated two components to performance funding. One is basically through the GRAD Act, which is legislatively based, which gives institutions authority to increase tuition if they increase performance, basically retention rate, graduation rates, and increases in degrees. And then
When they're looking at the graduation rates, is that a 6-year graduation rate?
6-year or 3-year for the 2-year colleges, yes, sir. And it had other measures, up to actually 56 measures, which might be too many. Several of those, there weren't really qualified measures for, so we're tracking those, and once we identify that there's a good trend for those, we'll probably add those into the metric. The big thing for us is actually showing progress for those institutions and help reward them for their performance. And then the other component is actually embedding that formula within the actual funding formula, not have it as a add-on, which often happens. I think yours is somewhat considered an add-on.
It has been in the past, this past year anyway.
Right. And what I would say is the best way to move forward on that is to incorporate it into your overall funding formula. It puts greater weight in it, and it actually makes sure the institutions know they have to perform on that area.
Yeah. I mean, this past year anyway, we were all new money. So for the universities, it was, if you received something, it was above and beyond what you were going to get anyway. And now the conversation is, I think, going to move towards some new money as well as affecting your base funding as well.
Even when you have a downturn, you should be still rewarding for performance.
Yes. Yeah. Have you looked at our metrics that we've been working with over the past year? We're down to 10. We started out probably 57, and we're down to 10. Have you had a chance to take a look at those?
Well, I know the dominant ones, which are the usual suspects, which I think are good. I think the most important thing is to look at mission-specific metrics so that you can identify something that the institutions really want to highlight, and I think that's important.
I'm going to switch gears on you. Could you talk a little bit about online learning? What your experience has been, what your philosophy is, where you think we're going, and we're undertaking some new initiatives in Florida, which you may or may not have had a chance to read up on. I'm just curious how you feel about the whole subject and where maybe you see us going from what you've read and your opinions.
Well, I'm certainly very interested in rethinking how we do instruction. A lot of went back to the Middle East and looked at classrooms from 3,000 years ago. We would look very similar to our current approach. I certainly believe in flipped classes, which is where a lot of the content can be done through asynchronous learning through lecture, and actually having the faculty be actively involved in having those critical conversations with students in the room. So you can actually take the stuff that sort of rote kind of activities, even the stuff the faculty don't initially enjoy, get that done asynchronously through recordings or through readings even, and then actually make the classroom much more interactive. Overall, what we've tried to do in all the other states I've been in is expand that opportunity for distance education because it allows flexibility, it allows the ability for the campuses to offer courses that perhaps may get filled and share with each other. I think it's the collaboration between the campuses that I think is very important. I recently spoke at the Council of Public Liberal Arts College national meeting, and even the public liberal arts colleges have come to establish a consortium where they actually share their lectures and classes on time to other liberal arts colleges throughout the country. Those type of cooperative relationships I think can be very beneficial, save money, be effective and efficient.
Thank you. Finally, subject of tuition. What has been, in recent history, the level of tuition increases in Louisiana and in your past, even prior to that, where you would have had you would have had input into what the tuition increases might have been?
Well, other than Florida, Louisiana has one of the lowest. I think we try to compete for the lowest tuition. In Louisiana, one of the issues that happened when we had the downturn was the inability really to put additional state funds into higher education. 90% of Louisiana's budget is earmarked for other things. Higher education wasn't ever identified as a priority, mostly because their economy was really oil and farming and hard labor for a long time. Now that's changed. We've got a lot of job opportunities coming in. We've got 77,000 jobs that are actually coming into the state over the next 5 years. The issue is we have to be able to address those workers and do it within a funding metric that allows the institutions to offer those courses. And for us, regretfully, it's going to have to be increasing tuition. So we increased tuition 10% a year for the last 3 years. We would expect to do that again this year. But even with that, I've got some institutions that are 25% off their peers in the SREB. And so we'll always still be a bargain. I've made a commitment to the legislature that we would never be above the SREB average. But I do believe it gives the institution the stability they need until the state funds further balance, which I think this year.
How do you balance the subject of tuition increase versus maybe just becoming more efficient in how the universities are operating?
Yeah, we've worked real hard with the campuses about that. There's one thing about talking about it. What we've actually done at the Board of Regents in Louisiana is look at the metrics that we know can help institutions become more effective and efficient. I've been a planner at several campuses, and one was a private university, and I can assure you private universities are much more efficient and effective than public universities. With that knowledge, we built metrics of information that we produce for them. We actually go out to the campuses, talk to the leaders, especially for the institutions that are having financial difficulty, and talk about how they can rethink their operational paradigms, everything from facility utilization to faculty workloads, times when the courses are offered, enrollment, recruitment strategies, actually the courses that are offering, what the big bottlenecks are, actually looking at grade distributions for the major courses that are offered at the institution. Most institutions, 30 to 40% of their courses are going to be 10 or 11 courses, and you can actually maximize the student success by making sure those courses have the best pedagogy and curricular design.
Thanks. So last question. So you mentioned the public institutions may not be as efficient as the private institutions.
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
Well, the first time I went to a private institution as the planner, to me, it was like planning without a safety net. I think that there was always this idea that someone would save you on the state side if things went bad, and historically that's been the case. Because of budget constraints right now, that's been a little bit more difficult, but that's just my observation. I think it's actually I've advised the campuses to think more like your private university brothers, develop the paradigm that works there, look for revenue streams of work. Also actually look at business strategies like the Boston Consulting Group Matrix. Put all your programs and courses in that matrix and see where those programs are so you can determine which programs make money for you, which ones don't, which ones may need to be redesigned, which ones perhaps need to be terminated for the benefit of the greater good.
Thank you, Dr. Purcell. Mr. Chairman.
Governor Chopra?
Welcome, Commissioner. First question I'm going to ask you actually will take you back to your dissertation. Your dissertation said high-risk indicators for retention. Retention is something we look at here in our state. Have the indicators changed?
I don't think necessarily the indicators change. I think it's all a bit about economics, where you're born, demographics, where you were educated. I've seen that in all I've worked in 5 southern states. I've seen the trends. I can actually do you maps of, poverty index, remediation rates, graduation rates, and it all aligns. I think the big thing is that we actually have a moral obligation to do outreach and to make that happen. One of the things we did in Arkansas is we actually got money from TANF funds, which is low-income state federal support, where they allowed us to take about $2 million to go out to the poorest counties, provide advising and support for students. And these guys mostly just work with kids at these poor schools to help them dream beyond what they see. Well, sometimes people don't know to go because they don't know how to go. They don't know really what the future looks like. And that was really a very effective program and is still continuing to this day. I think those kind of outreach activities are important. We all need to be stewards of our local communities, and I think that helps grow the institution itself with those firm relationships that you have in your home communities.
Thank you. How many AA schools should Florida have? Let me just preface that by saying that in the AAU, none of the schools have a student-to-faculty ratio more than 17.
Right.
We have one that may be on that number or close to it. So tying those two together, how many should we have and how do we approach that?
I certainly think AAU is an aspirational thing to have, and God bless the one that gets there first, which I think is an amazing feat. It is a goal of most flagships or any high intensive research institutions to get there. LSU is not there. We had a big assessment this last year, try to determine what it would take to get us there, and financially, until things stabilize, we don't think that we could provide the resources to get them to that point. So I think you have to really contemplate that. I think you actually have several institutions that have potential there, and we should encourage them as we can. But certainly we've got to make sure that we provide the resources to make that happen.
Okay, and it's tied to the resources, of course.
Yes, sir.
All right, let me take you to your current role as commissioner, but also think of your future as chancellor. Communication is an important thing. So let me break this into two parts. How would you work with the Board of Trustees and the presidents? That's our governance structure.
Right. Yeah, I think the big thing is knowing who needs to know what, when, where, and how. I actually have that in my office on a mirror. That's not that I needed a mirror in my office. The previous commissioner had one, so it's in there. So instead, I put this sign up there, and that's been real important. I've communicated actually to the Board of Governors, your group, every week, basically a weekly update, just to sort of see what the big issues are. And then I do communications, we call a commissioner communique to the campuses to let them be aware of issues that are coming up and to keep them actively engaged in higher education issues and factors. So I think that's the big thing is communication. But I think really the audience that you need to work with is the legislature, the governor, and the constituents out in the communities. When you think about coming into a position, I could think me being able to get here within 90 days. I've already have a pre-90-day plan in my head about what I need to do before I get here, and then of course the 90 days after that would include getting into all the communities where our universities are, talking to all the significant persons, and what we try to do is, and I can just hand this out legislatively, is identify where all the legislators are in the state, try to set up very large meetings where that conversation can occur, because I think it's real important about how you establish those relationships. And this is our plan for this year as we roll out our legislative agenda and really talk to the legislators in Louisiana. And I can see very quickly us being able to develop something like that. This group, I think, has to basically frame the message. It has to be something that's clear and concise, not too complex, something that both the communities and legislators can fully embrace and do it in a way that it's a win-win for everybody.
You mentioned constituents, and I represent one of them. In the past, it's been harder for chancellors to go down to the level of faculty, staff, students. A hectic schedule, you don't really have. Will you look for forum for where you can actually directly communicate with these constituents?
Yes, sir. I've both in Arkansas and Louisiana, I've attended several of the state AUP meetings. Let them ask the questions, and they're the most vocal of the faculty groups, and they've been appreciative of that. I've also attended all the faculty president meetings in the state. I have a recent chapter in a book called Assisting Institutional Governance or something. It's on my resume. I'm not sure what the title is. But that really talks about not only working with the campuses and constituents and faculty, but it's actually working with those that are within the institutional community, especially faculty activity groups, to make sure that they have the information available and knowledge to make sure that they can be real participants, rather than just, throwing rocks at a window. What I've tried to do this last couple years since I've been in Louisiana, because there really wasn't that much faculty support, is have them participate. We have a tuition task force that has 2 faculty representatives on it, never had before. We have a formula funding task force, which I have 1 member of faculty on. So that's what I've tried to do, is make sure they're engaged and communicate to them with those campus-wide communiques.
My last question deals with if you've had a chance to look at our current structure in the state, do you think the balance right now between the Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees, the individual Board of Trustees, is just right, or is it tilted one way or the other?
It looks pretty good to me. And in Louisiana, there was a big conversation about whether there should be just one board, one system. We had that conversation early. We actually had experts come in and testify, several study commissions. And really what they concluded is that there's no perfect silver bullet for leading campuses, and if you work honestly and fairly with each other, have a collegial relationship with all involved, you're going to get in the right direction without having to change everything that exists. I think there's some comfort in having actually each campus have their own trustees.
Do you see yourself more as a facilitator or a gatekeeper?
Definitely a facilitator. I have a master's in counseling. My office is always, I try to get a big round table, super round table, sort of Knights of the Round Table. I try to treat the faculty, anybody that comes to my office as colleagues. We have real robust conversations. My staff actually can tell me anything, good, bad, ugly, whatever. And to me, that's real important for you to have a real solid relationship. And then one of the other things I try to do is probably once every 6 months I'll throw out a white paper on a particular issue that's of interest to everyone in the state, throw it out there and let people affirm or not affirm that's an area we need to go. Because I think a lot of times it's the inability to have an open conversation that causes a lot of distrust. And what you'll see from me is that I believe in democratization of the data. We provide a lot of information to the campuses that they can make changes on, and then at the same time let people know what I'm thinking. There's really no secrets in my particular style of management.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor Chopra. Governor Frost.
Thank you. First of all, welcome to Florida. We're happy to have you, and you have a very, very impressive resume. You've obviously been a leader in a few states. And I just have one question. I mean, you are now a chancellor, technically. That's what we're looking for. You have the responsibility of many locations, working with the governor, working with the legislators, communicating, et cetera, all the skills that we are looking for. Why are you coming to us?
Well, as my beginning remarks mentioned, y'all have been an entity that I've looked at for new ideas. I'm excited about the fact that there's been some forward thinking and a willingness to attempt new things. I believe in changing the world. I think y'all have done a great job of doing that. I've been actually very impressed. The fact that you as a state has actually stated we need more medical schools and actually went out and did it and put them in the right places, I think is very impressive. It's that kind of forward thinking that I try to have, and I'm excited about being with people that are of like mind.
Well, that's a good answer. But you talk about medical schools, we do have a few.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's a whole topic unto itself, as you know. We are educating young people who are looking for residencies, and we only have X number of residencies in the state of Florida. And so we spend a lot of money, and we've approved these medical schools, and they do get residencies, all of them, but they go out of state, and are hoping one day they will come back. Have you had experience with, I don't know, in Louisiana, Arkansas, and so forth? What's your relationship with the medical school complex?
Yes.
I noticed that you do some, you have written papers on nursing and health care and so forth, but...
Right. I worked in a nursing and allied health college,
Right.
so certainly on the allied health side, I have a strong background. With the medical schools, a lot of conversation, both in Arkansas here, and actually in Oklahoma, where we had a big healthcare worker shortage, which we addressed. I think the key is you've got to make sure that you spend your resources where you need the graduates, to focus on those high-cost programs, addressing where those are. Y'all have done a lot of nice things by actually encouraging those people to come back to the state or be in this state by giving them the ability to have some of their loans forgiven if they go out into the rural settings. I think that's very important. I will say one of the things we've done in our Louisiana has a large shortage of engineers and those kind of people. What we've done is we've actually taken a list of all our graduates in the last 15 years and worked with a data mining company to identify where those graduates are, what their personal income is at this point, and what their lifestyle behaviors are, and try to recruit them back for the opportunities that we have. So one of the things you can do is you can do an active effort to recapture people who already have an affinity for the state. I think that's the key to making things happen. And what you'll identify is 90% of all your students go to school here in the state, so there is an affinity for the institutions they go to. It's not a hard sell. If mama's here, it's an easier sell. And some of these data mining companies, depending on the price, you can identify whether their most recent or their closest relatives live, and that's another bit of information that can help you encourage them to come back to the state. So I think that's definitely an asset that Florida has, both in all the STEM programs and in the medical school, that you could actually do is to find out where they are and give them an opportunity to come back knowing their current conditions.
So you think our STEM focus is important?
Yes, ma'am. I think that's probably the biggest sell. And if you think about what the futurists say about building the modern economy, it's all about density of educated and skilled workers. The nice thing is about most of your campuses, they're in the dense community centers. You've got the volume on those campuses that produces a vibrant community. And to me, those are the things that are going to attract businesses for the future. Those of us that travel overseas or something, we go to a lot of places that used to be something. And the nice thing that y'all have done by putting these campuses in the right place, I think is going to make sure that those communities, although they may be tourist attractions and things like that, but they'll also be a vibrant intellectual community that's going to build an economy for a long term.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Frost. Actually, Governor Frost, if you recall, that the last medical school we approved was FAU,
Right.
which we turned them down
Yes.
until they came back with 300 residency, and that 300 residency today is very vibrant, and it was a partnership between the university and hospitals surrounding that area. Let me ask you about online education.
Okay.
Florida, is becoming very interested on, online degrees. What is your experience on online degree, and what do you think of it?
I'm a fan. My sister teaches online degrees at University of Alabama. I did distance learning. We did, back when microwave technology was state-of-the-art, we did point-to-point microwave technology for doing off-campus sites in Alabama when I worked in that area. When I came and worked at Our Lady of the Lake, I was the technology guy that beamed classes from Loyola to the Our Lady of the Lake campus for master's degrees in nursing. We have several campuses in both Arkansas and Louisiana that that's their claim to fame. I have one institution in Louisiana, a third of all their enrollment is fully online degree programs. So all of our campuses are getting in that area. I think you have to be very thoughtful. I've actually had to work with campuses to make sure that they didn't get out of line with the accrediting agencies, and especially when they deal with third-party providers for providing content, that can be problematic. SACS requires that you actually have control of your faculty, and you have to do some modification to contracts. And so I'm very familiar in making sure you establish those things well. I think the big thing is to make sure that it's a complete plan. It's something that can keep people inspired. And then keep in mind that a lot of people need the human interaction either through online conversations and blogs and those kind of activities, or through actually having some means for them to come together as a community of educators.
What would you do in the first 90 days of, if you take this job?
Certainly the listening tour. The nice thing about having a listening tour throughout the state is to just getting a better focus of the entire state. Start in one part of the state and just stay rolling until we get all that done. All along address all the legislators, the significant persons in those communities, working with students, understanding really the side thought processes at the campuses, and having real conversations with the campuses about what they really want to be when they grow up, how that aligns with what we think that their role, scope, and mission is, and how we can work together to make that happen.
How would you, in working with the legislators, because we have legislators in a different area of our state, and then of course those legislators that we have that are interested with their area and the universities that they represent, and then you have the governor's office, and then you have the board of governors that have the interests of the whole state, creating the synergy. How do you work to align all those interests?
Well, first of all, I always work for the Board of Governors, or in my case, the Board of Regents in Louisiana. I'm your spokesperson. Every speech, every road I go down, I make sure that those conversations are vetted. I may not use the speech, but you get to see what I was thinking about saying to an audience. And I think that's important. I think that we all need to be on the same page. I'm basically your servants. If there's efforts by legislators and or the governor to go in a particular direction, I need to make sure that I inform you all of that and have a better idea of where to go. That's, I think, the nature of the job. To me, that's the exciting part. I've won big in situations like that, and other times it's been a very painful experience when you don't win big, or you have to say, well, we don't think we need to go there. But when I say that, it's with the support of the board. To me, that's the most important part. You're going to need to have somebody that has the ability to have those relationships, but also who's willing to speak your mind if your mind is in contrast to what the legislature or the governor perhaps have in mind.
Thank you. I'm going to turn back over to our panelists. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Chopra.
I follow up to Chair Hosseini's comment on online. I know it's not a black and white issue, but what do you think of MOOCs? Because you talked about third party,
Right.
but I think the emphasis on MOOCs is building up as we see, and that could potentially have faculty control implications as well.
Right. Yeah, I certainly think that you can certainly have any expert in a particular field that you trust and verify to be an entity which you can provide those courses. Of course, MOOCs historically haven't been as successful. Of the people that sign up, maybe 10% finish. You really just have to think through those particular constructs and feel comfortable with it. I'm not totally comfortable yet with the MOOC activity, but I certainly think that online learning is something that we have to do. That actually works. Like I said, for me, my preference would be something like a flipped course or something that is a combination where you actually, they may get all their information from a MOOC, but you actually have them come on campus for real dialogue with a real faculty member so that they can really understand the constructs and the idea. I mean, keep in mind, knowledge is important, but understanding is something else, and sometimes that does require a relationship and ability to have a conversation.
Can I follow up on that?
I might use that last sentence of yours in my own presentations, knowledge and learning, the difference between that. Yes, of course.
The only thing I'm trying to struggle with on the online piece, because I just don't know enough, is the campuses have limitations from a physical plant standpoint. So University of Florida, for example, if you doubled the size of the student body because of online, because there's a lot of qualified applicants today that aren't admitted, you wouldn't, I don't think you'd be able to have that blend of online and on-campus learning, just because I think there wouldn't be the space. But I may be looking at it wrong, because what you say makes sense. I'm just wondering if that isn't the perfect world versus the actual world.
Right. And I think y'all have made some efforts to try to have students take at least a certain number of online courses. Also, the idea of actually having students take so many courses in the summer, I think, are both very sound and solid approaches to make sure you maximize a state resource. I certainly think that there's got to be a role to make sure that we have these students actually have an experience. If you're a University of Florida graduate, there's certain things that you want to inculcate in them, and I think that's important. Some of the other efficiencies you can do also, and a lot of the literature is saying, is that perhaps we give students too many choices, and especially in the freshman and sophomore year, and to redefine really what our graduates and our personnel need to be successful in the world. And to me, that's a faculty conversation. I think it would be an individual institution conversation, but within parameters that we as the Board of Governors and our staff really work through.
Thank you.
It's interesting because that ties in with our Gen Ed reform that's
Yes, sir.
currently underway. Absolutely. Something that Governor Kuntz brought up that leads to a follow-up is the whole facility. How is Louisiana doing currently with growing infrastructure? Because we are not doing well.
Right. Deferred maintenance is a big issue in all the states. We've got $1.8 billion in deferred maintenance, which is a lot. And, as you know, we had some issues with one of our college's football teams' weight room, had some issues recently. We've got campuses that are having issues just doing plain maintenance. We have to address those. We've asked for additional funds for next year to, address the worst of all the deferred maintenance issues. The other one is to set up a mechanism for the institutions to sort of have control of their deferred maintenance a little bit better. In Louisiana, for example, everything sort of has to go through a central entity. What we're seeking is an ability for institutions to actually borrow from a fund using their own money so they can fix things before they become a big, costly deferred maintenance item. The other thing we did both in Arkansas and Louisiana since I've been there is for new construction, we build in a maintenance fund for perpetuity for that entity. So you have to add a cost on top of that. So in the future, we won't have that. And we certainly have to address the buildings that exist. But in the buildings that are new, all of them will have a fund developed that helps maintain that building over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And where does that fund come from? From the state? The legislators approved that? How does that come from?
The fund on new construction, they would just build that into their cost. It's a 3% for most buildings. Whatever they pay in to pay back their loan or their bond or whatever, they would actually pay an additional 3% of that into a fund, a reserve account on that campus to address all maintenance needs for that building. And it just stays there. For buildings that are less robust in detail and content, we've gone down to about 1%, like if they're doing a parking garage, things like that don't have lots of moving parts, about 1%. So there is a moving scale depending on the type of facility.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something about that now you data mining of the students that graduated from your state. And did you hire a firm to do that?
Yes, sir. I've used 3 firms in several states, and I also did a similar project for students that had more than 2 years of college and no degree to try to get them back in, because for us, especially in Arkansas when we started this, we had lots of students that had gone to college but hadn't finished. And so we did the same type of data mining for students that we thought were close to degree, that if we encouraged them to get back, especially with our scholarship money that we had, we could communicate to them. We built scatter plots on where these people lived, and what we discovered is they actually lived pretty close to the campus they attended, and you could actually get them back in fairly quickly. And in a state like this, where you have a lot of the universities in the city centers, I think you can really do a big turnaround on degree production just by getting people re-engaged, establishing a strong adult degree completion program, especially one that's guided toward the workforce needs for the region. The other thing we got in this data mining activity was they actually gave us data of other people who came to the state who had some college and no degree, which is not necessarily a purely something that we couldn't go back and look for what courses they were in, but it was a way for us to expand our market if we were trying to address certain issues and we needed somebody with some skill sets. So there's some great ability now that Big Brother is out there is to contract with them and get information that we need. And it wasn't the National Science, NSF.
You were tracking where they're employed and what their compensation is, and it was not, it was nationwide. So
Nationwide, absolutely. And I produced maps for the institutions for statewide distribution and within the state. Of course, LSU had a lot more people outside the state than you would a regional university.
But you could get the data, because some have
Yes, sir.
Suggested that data just would not be available.
What you do is basically you take directory information that most campuses have, and you take the last known address. I mean, it's like whenever I've moved, my bills are there before I even get moved into the house, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same entities that do that. Use directory information. They'll track down the addresses, even if it's just a campus address. Somebody knew that they lived there, and they track them into the new address. And you can get up to 1,500 columns information, but I've never been able to afford more than 3 or 4 data points on state money,
Actually, that's what I was getting,
Yeah,
to be able to
yeah.
get the data that people that get jobs,
Right.
and get degrees. What would be one of the biggest issue we have, and it is involving our performance funding. As a matter of fact, what would the one thing would be that to bring down, we have 50% average out, 50% of our students in 6 years don't graduate.
Correct.
What the one thing would be to improve that?
Yes, sir. I think that's the area. You've got several institutions that are Florida and Florida State are amazingly successful in graduating their students.
Right.
The rest are probably right under 50%. I think the goal would be to get everybody at least to 50%. I think the targets that are in the strategic plan are correct, and I think that we can get them there. One of the things that we did in both Arkansas and in Louisiana with our plan is we actually produced a matrix that showed what each institution should have to produce if we were going to reach our goal and targets. And based on that, we can really work with those campuses on how to enhance that. The other one is to do a lot more detail of those students who drop out or stop out, and you can do that with like the information I provide through tracking these students down who drop out and getting them back in. And the other is to intervene on those students before they become a statistic and no longer there. One of our efforts in Louisiana through GRAD Act is that they have to show improvement every year in graduation rates, retention rates, and degrees. Some of the institutions have actually identified students who the only reason for dropping out is because they have some financial shortage. Well, it's easier for them to give a tuition waiver and keep them so that they don't lose their state funding and their tuition authority than to not. And so it's actually paying attention to what the needs of the individual students are and making sure that that institution meets the needs. Too much in higher ed, especially on the public side, it's like hocus pocus without a focus. We do lots of magical things that perhaps isn't zoned in on what matters. And I think that's the key, is to zone in on the things that matter for your state and move forward. And some of it is, for your regional universities, a little bit more concentration on what the regional communities need, making sure that there's firm relationships on what the business and stuff need and want in research and in employees. And in turn, what that does is provide a revenue stream, or at least potential benefactors that are out there in that community. I mean, some of the stuff that I think one of the medical schools did is they were able to have people graduate from medical school without debt, but that was done with local commitment to make that happen. And to me, that's the excitement that happens. Arkansas had 3 situations where that happened, which I think is really what it's about. And all the futures are saying you can't think of your answer as a statewide solution. It actually has to be somewhat provincial and regional. It's sort of, we're going back to Sparta and Athens, where you have these city-states that can thrive or not thrive based on the amount of local support and, of course, the state support there. But the ones that survive are the ones that actually have the skin in the game locally and things we can do to enhance that relationship. Arkansas, we have one city called El Dorado, which I'm sure you haven't heard of, but a guy gave $20 million to his local high school. Right. Everybody that goes to that school gets to go to college for free anywhere in America. Mm-hmm. And what that instantly did is it changed the graduation rate from like the low 80s to 96%. people started wanting to come into that community because they wanted to be a part of that free scholarship opportunity. Property values went up. The downtown, I spoke at their graduation, or at the junior college's graduation there. The downtown's very vibrant, and it really just rekindled the excitement about what the American dream is possible. They actually had somebody that was in San Antonio as the musical conductor decide to move to El Dorado to be involved with that community as a head of the music department at the high school. He was a conductor, but he had 4 kids, and as a conductor, he was trying to figure out how do I get my 4 kids to have a chance at the American dream and going to college. And he moved to El Dorado, Arkansas, to become head of music. To me, that's the exciting things you can do if you get local communities involved. That happened there. Soon after that, other places provided local scholarships for their local students, some of them just to go to the local community college, and others to let them to go to any college in the state. So to me, if we can jumpstart that in some communities here, I think you'll really have some exciting activities, and that's something that across the border people look at and say, I want to be a part of something like that, and everybody wants to come to Florida anyway, so I think this is the thing, the icing on the cake that'll make a big difference.
Great, thank you so much. Do you have any, if you don't have any other questions?
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
The relationship with what we call our college system, you may call it community college system.
Yes, sir.
What has been your experience with that? We've got a more prominent role of our college system as it appears. It used to be a community college, now they're offering 4-year degrees. How has it been, and how would you approach that here?
Well, in Arkansas, they all reported to me individually, so they were under me. In Louisiana, we have 4 systems underneath on my board, and so I work with all those systems, including the 2-year college system. So I'm very familiar with the different approaches to that. I think the big thing is to understand really what their interests and needs are, and how do we make sure that there's seamless transfer. You all have done that. The course articulations, I think, is important, the common course numbering. All those things are the things that we've been trying to incorporate to make that happen. I think the other part is to not only be supportive of them, but also make sure that the universities also take the mantle of workforce development and not let it just be a community college metric that they can go out and sell, because there's really a lot of opportunities for us to actually produce the graduates for business and industry. I was in Alabama in Tuscaloosa when Mercedes came, and I was at the community college there. I just left there from the university. And Mercedes said, we just want bachelor's degree people to work in our factory because of the skill sets that are required to build a nice Mercedes. And so I think that we have to be fully engaged in the workforce conversation with them, and then of course be supportive of them, make sure the transferring occurs, make sure that we give them feedback loops for if there's certain courses that don't seem to prepare us well for. Have a conversation about, what is a college algebra course, what is those things, and I know y'all have done that, but it's a continuous conversation.
Do you have any parting words for us?
Well, I would certainly be honored to have this opportunity to serve you all. I can assure you that the work ethic is there. I've got the experience working in 3 systems, understand the good, bad, and ugly of that. I love the process. I think there's a difference sometimes between somebody that is a campus president and what this job entails. It's a very different type thing. I think a lot of times the campus presidents appreciate that I like this part, and that I don't necessarily want to just be a bigger, campus acting kind of president. I understand a time that when I'm local, that I let the president always take the lead that's there, and then of course I serve as sort of a senior person coming in, almost like an uncle that's there to make sure that they do well, give them parameters on what life and how things should run, and then work together as a team. To me, it's all about the American dream, and to me, coming to Florida would be a part of my American dream, and I look forward to that opportunity, should I be offered.
Mr. Purcell, your resume is very impressive. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. We will immediately go to the next candidate. Okay. Thank you.